Hi guys, welcome to the decimal unit. We're going to be doing this a little different than the past couple units. I'm experimenting with what is called inverting the class. Up until now, class has been me going over a notebook item, showing you how to work a problem through at the beginning of class, and then, after doing an activity, sending you home with some practice for homework. Well, your homework now is going to be to view a video of me reviewing the notebook item, and then going through some sample problems. As I'm doing that, you too should be filling out your notebook item. The next day in class, you're going to have a chance to do the practice work that in the past you'd done for homework. That'll let me take a look at how you're doing and either tell you you're doing it right or give you some tips on what might be not going right. All right, let's get started. Our first lesson is going to be about relating fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. All right, so here's our KUD for the lesson. I want you guys to know what defines a decimal, that fractions and decimals can all be shown in different ways, but they're the same number. I also want you to know that decimals represent parts of wholes, and in order to solve problems, you need to be able to move between the representations. Let's start the notebook item. And this would be notebook item number 1. Decimals and fractions both represent parts of a whole. Decimals and fractions can represent the same number. So for example, 1/4 is equal to 25 hundredths. You might also hear me say 0.25. A decimal divides a whole into equal parts of 10, 100, 1,000, so on. That's why I referred to this number as 25 hundredths. It's 2 numbers past the decimal, therefore it's in the hundredths. A number like this would be in the thousands. Decimals differ a little from fractions in that a fraction divides a whole into any number of equal parts. The point of this notebook item is that you can write fractions as decimals and decimals as fractions. Let's get to it. How would we do that? Well, let's say I have a decimal. The part of the whole is going to end up being the numerator, or as you might recall, I referred to it as the adjective, the describing word. The whole itself is going to be the denominator or the noun, the word that's being described. So for instance, when we talked about this connection in fractions, 5/7, the numerator is the adjective describing how many sevenths I have. And the sevenths is the noun. That's the thing I happen to have. Oops. So if we dealt with a decimal, for instance, 5/10, we could write 0.5 as 5/10. And again, the adjective is the 5. The noun is the tenths. We'd write it as 5/10. And as we always do with fractions, answers need to be written in simplest form. The simplest form of 5/10 is 1/2. Another example, if we look at this, 0.09. If we say that correctly, we say that as 9 hundredths. It's 2 numbers past the decimal. Start in our tenths, go to our hundredths. So we write it as 9 hundredths, and you can write it as 9 over 100. The adjective is the 9. The noun is the 100, the denominator. On your paper, see if you can fill out what 0.6 and 0.06 is. I'm going to do it here on the sheet as well. So 0.6 we would write as 6 6 tenths. Let me get this down, right? 6 tenths which we would write as 6 over 10. The 6 is the adjective describing how many tens I have. And remember, we can reduce that down by dividing by 2 over 2 to 3/5. What about this one, 0.06? Well, we go 2 places over, so we're in the hundredths. We have 6 of them. So once again, I have 6 hundredths. Which we would write as 6, the adjective, over the noun 100, which we can simplify to 3/50ths, again by dividing by 2 over 2. Okay, so that was decimals to fractions. How about fractions to decimals? Well, the easiest way to do this is, if possible, you want to change the fraction to tenths, hundredths, or thousandths in the denominator. So for example, 2/5 I can change into tenths by simply multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by 2. So 1, which is equal to 1, 2 over 2. So 2/5 becomes 4/10. And again, you're going in the reverse direction of what we just did. 4 over 10 can be written as 0.44. 23/100ths is already in a form that we can work with. It's in hundredths. So you write that as 23 over 100, or 0.23. So let's do some practice on your own. What are we going to do to get 5/20ths into a number that we can work with? If we think about it, 20 can become 100 by simply multiplying by 5. So if I multiply the bottom by 5, in order to multiply by 1, I need to also multiply the top by 5. This would become, then, therefore, 25 hundredths. And you can write that. We know that it's in the hundredths, so we know it needs to go 2 places over from the decimal, 0.25. 64 hundredths. That's a nice one. Already in with 100 in the denominator down there. So we simply write this as 0.64. 1/8. That's going to be a little more difficult. We know the 8 doesn't go into 10. Does 8 go into 100? Not evenly. What about 1,000? Well, if we multiply both the numerator and the denominator by 125, over 125, we would get to 1,000. 125, 1,000. Or 0.125. How about 25ths? Well, we know there are how many quarters in a dollar? 4. So we could go to 100 by multiplying times 4 over 4. That would get us to 16/100ths. Again, 2 numbers over from the decimal, 0.16. Oops. Now, we got another problem. What happens when we deal with fractions with denominators that can't be made into tenths, hundredths, or thousands? Sometimes you're going to have that problem. You're going to need to change the fraction to a decimal anyways to be able to work with it in the way you want. So let's talk about the example of 2/7. There's no way I can ever change that denominator of 7 into a tenth, a hundredth, a thousandth, a 10,000th, anything like that that I'm going to be able to work with and make it into a decimal. So there's got to be something else I can do. Well, if we think about it, a fraction is actually a division problem. I've talked to you guys and I've said that this sign right here really means to divide, doesn't it? So what we're doing is the fraction tells you to divide the numerator by the denominator. In this case, the numerator is 2, so we're going to divide it by 7. Well, 7 doesn't go into 2. It's going to be too small. So what can we do? We can always add a decimal point in zeros. That's not going to change the value. So now 7 goes into 2.000. Keep putting on the zeros as much as I want to put the zeros on. In this case, I'm just going to go to the thousands place because I think that's enough. Now, when you divide into a decimal, first thing you're going to want to do is bring the decimal point up. So I'm going to bring the decimal point right up here. It was right here. I bring it right up there. Now, I can do my long division as I normally would. I could say 7 goes into 20. How many times? Well, we know 7 goes into 20 2 times. 2 times 7 is 14. Subtract it. I get 60. I get 6, excuse me. Bring down my 0. So I got 60. 7 goes into 60 how many times? 8. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract it. I get 4. Bring one more 0 down. 7 goes into 40 how many times? 5. I could continue. I could round. I'm just going to stop and say I'm going to leave it at that. So in this case, 2/7 for me, I'm going to be close enough by saying it equals 285 thousandths. As I said here, I think most of the time it's okay to divide the decimal point until it gets to the thousandths. In a lot of decimals, you can actually keep going. And we're going to spend some time talking about that. Some decimals, you're going to notice they're going to stop. We call those terminating decimals. Okay, terminating means to end, so that there's actually a stop. You could add zeros afterwards, but it's still the same number. Other decimals, you notice a pattern in. They're never going to stop. We call those repeating decimals. I'm going to give you an example. 1/3. If I take 1 and I divide it by 3, I can add my decimal in, add some zeros, bring my decimal up here. I said 3 goes into 10 how many times? Well, 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Subtract, I get 1. Bring down my 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. Okay, 3 times 3 is 9. Do you notice a pattern? That's what's called a repeating decimal. And what we do with repeating decimals, because they go on forever, is we actually write them with a bar over the top of them. 0.3 with a bar over the top of it means that 3.3 keeps repeating again and again and again. And that's what 1/3 is going to be equal to. All right, so you just spent some time learning about converting fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. I hope you filled out your notebook item. If you need to, you can obviously go back through and watch this video again. Get your notebook item filled out for tomorrow, and we will start tomorrow by doing some practice with this. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow in class.